da one ni engasoa the ho engachignano the no owencho the nechi. And now I'm going to begin and I'm going to talk about what happened a long time ago. I'm going to start by talking about what happened in our territory roughly 1,000 years ago. It was kind of a dark history, a dark time in our history. So we're going to talk about this this shape here. This has become to be kind of known as a rough idea of the state of New York. We have different groups that lived here and do live here, continued to live here. And way back in that time, these people really lived similar. And by that, they lived and believed similar things. And we'll discuss first the people here. In their own language, they referred to themselves as Onondagas. Onondagas meaning people of the Great Hill. And the Great Hill people lived in the Genesee Valley and around Canandaigua Lake area. And these people are symbolized by a gastoa or headdress that has one feather standing straight up. So they're neighbors to the east, and we refer to them as the Kayong People. And they're symbolized with a gastoa that has one feather on it, but it kind of slants to the back like that, to the back of the headdress. So Kayong or people of swampy territory or swampy land, they became known as the Cayuga people. So next we come into a group in the Seneca language. We refer to them as Onondagas or Onondagiona. Onondagas, the people on the hill, they became known as Onondagas. So Onondagas, people on the hill, all discussing territories, all discussing things from their territories. Next we run into a group to the east, Otneotka, referred to in Seneca, we call them that. Otneotka, Kiona. Otneotka, talking about people of the standing stone. And they became known as the Oneidas, with two feathers up and one kind of slanting towards the back. So we see those groups, and it would be generally maybe a little bit more this way, but this is just a rough sketch. So next we run into a group referred to as Ganyangiona. Ganyangiona, people of the Flint or the Mohawk Nation. That's what they're referred to, kind of, you could say in English. Now, these five nations all lived very similar, all had very similar beliefs. They all planted the three sisters. They all lived in bark houses, long bark houses. And you would think that they would be getting along fine, but 1,000 years ago, in this dark period of our history, it was full of chaos. And by that, I mean, the people were doing poor. The people were having a lot of warfare. One nation fighting against the other, fighting against territory. There was almost like gang mentality, where an eye for an eye, and whoever was the strongest warrior or had the strongest warriors was the strongest. So it happened that the big nations, the Onondagas and Ganyangiona people, They were kind of ruling the territories because they had the most and they were fierce. So it happened that the other tribes were kind of suffering and everybody was kind of in a bad way. So there was bad things going on. And, you know, we'd catch somebody in our territory and kill them. They'd catch one of our people in their territory, they'd kill them. So we kept having back and forth retaliation all the time. And what happened is the Creator saw this and it made him sad. So he decided to send his word of peace to the people. And it's interesting that where he chose to send this word of peace is to a nation that lived north of this Lake Ontario, and in a place called near the Bay of Quinties, on this side, the northern side of Ontario, amongst the Huron people, was born a boy to a virgin mother. And this boy was given the word of the Creator. And his story is the story that we're going to be telling. We refer to him as the Peacemaker. And the Peacemaker story is a long one. And I'm going to tell a real short version of it so that you understand the ideas of this story. Now, with such bloodshed and turmoil going on this side, what happened is up here, he is born and he becomes a young man. And even in this territory, North Territory, amongst the Huron people, they are also very warlike. And it's the same all over the place. A lot of bloodshed, a lot of killing. And even the kids, when they played war all the time. So the Peacemaker, even as a young guy, he's trying to talk to kids and trying to talk to this one and talk to that one and say, you should stop fighting. Maybe we should have and talk out our problems. That talking should replace this violence. And the people didn't listen. The people didn't like his message and they wouldn't listen to him. So he decided that he had this great message from the Creator, and as he grew up and became a man, he decided to spread this message of peace. So he left this territory and he came across Lake Ontario, and as he came across, he came into the territory of the Kayong People. And when he came to their territory, he did something that he told them. He went to the outside of their village and he built a campfire. And back in those times of war, you couldn't just waltz into somebody's village. So he built a fire, and where his smoke went up, those Mohawk people sent runners there. And they asked him, they said, find out who this is and what do they want. And they came on the Peacemaker, and the Peacemaker was just sitting there and he was looking at these sticks. So he had these two Y sticks set up, and on top he had a stick across, and he had these strings of wooden beads laid across that stick. And he was just sitting there kind of mumbling to himself. And the runners came up and they asked the Peacemaker, what do you want? And the Peacemaker took one of those strings of wooden beads. Those wooden beads, and he gave them their elder twigs on strings. And he gave it to them, and he told them, he says, tell your people to rejoice, that the message of peace, power, and righteousness have come to the people. So they were like, well, what's that? They took the beads and they went to their leaders. And once they got there, they talked to their leaders, and they says, this guy is out there and he's got this message, And he's talking about peace, power, and righteousness. They brought him in and they started to listen to his message. And as they did, they stopped him. And they says, whoa, 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 hold on here. We're going to give you a test. And they says, this test that we're going to give you, if you pass the test, we'll listen to your message. And the peacemaker says, well, I have the message of the Creator, so I will take your test. And what they did was, they had the peacemaker go to the edge of a great big cliff. And where this cliff was, there was a lot of jagged rocks at the bottom, and it was a long way down. And the peacemaker went there, and they told him, they said, okay, now if you want us to hear your message, you need to climb up the tree. And they had him climb this great big pine tree. And this pine tree was leaning over the edge of this great big cliff. And as he's climbing up there, you know, he's thinking, well, if this is how they're going to listen to my message, then I guess I better do it. So he climbed up this giant tree. And as he climbed up, they tell him, keep going further, go further, until finally he was way at the very top. As he's climbing, they're cutting the tree and they start a fire down below, and they cut the tree down and it goes falling off the cliff. And as the tree goes, they see the peacemaker go flying down the cliff, and they think it's funny. And they think, we got rid of that guy. Peace, power, and righteousness. What is he talking about? You know, they didn't want to hear that message. And being that they were the Kayong People, they were strong, and they saw peace and this message as a sign of weakness. And, you know, the next day came, and in that same spot where his camp was, there was smoke again. And so the leaders sent runners out there. And sure enough, the peacemaker was sitting there again. And he took the next string of beads and he gave it to those guys, same as he did the day before. And he said, tell your people to rejoice, because the message of peace, power, and righteousness has arrived. And those runners came back and they gave it to their leaders. And this time they brought him back and they listened to the whole message. You know, he says, everybody's having a hard time. Maybe we should talk out our problems instead of resorting to violence. And maybe we would be better off that way. They said, let us think about it. They wouldn't accept his message of peace. And they says, we want to think about it. And so the peacemaker left. And the peacemaker traveled towards the west. And as he traveled towards the west, he came next to the Untitled People. And as he came there to the Onondagas Nation, he did the same thing. He went in telling them that he had this great message from the Creator, and that talking should replace bloodshed. That if we have a disagreement, we should work it out instead of resort to violence. And the Onondagas people listened to the message, but they were a small group. And they were afraid to accept the message. And they were afraid because they said the Kayong people, they're tough, you know, and that they also saw it as maybe a sign of weakness. So the Onondagas Nation also wanted to think about it. And they asked the peacemaker, where are you going from here? And he says, I'm traveling to the west, and I'm talking to the nations, and I'm trying to get them to change their life and to change their way and to accept this message of peace, because I'm on a mission of peace.